So this short video is a procedural note to explain briefly how a defendant is charged with a felony. You'll go through the grand jury process when you take criminal procedure, but I thought it might be helpful to have a little bit of information now about how somebody goes from, let's say, arrest up to a trial. So, when someone is arrested, the police will charge that person with violations of the relevant criminal code. In New York, it's the New York penal law. So the police report will often have a place where there's a charge or an offense listed, and there will be some sort of either the name of an offense or some code provision from the New York penal law or whatever other law was violated. And so they're considered in the sort of colloquial sense to have been charged, but that's not what we talk about when we mean a formal charge, which is an indictment. So there's an informal charge, which is what the police do. Then that information is forwarded to the prosecutor's office. That's the state's attorney at the state level, often called the district attorney, or the U.S. attorney at the federal level. The prosecutor then decides whether to move forward with a prosecution of the defendant for the conduct. And a large part of the job is exercising discretion in which cases to move forward with and which cases to drop. And then the victim doesn't decide whether the prosecution moves forward. Sometimes we talk about victims dropping charges or refusing to go forward with charges. And actually, it's not up to the victim. Now, what is up to the victim is whether to cooperate or not to cooperate. And if the victim doesn't cooperate and testify, it's going to be very difficult to get a conviction in, let's say, a simple assault case. If there are no witnesses and the victim won't testify, it's going to be very difficult to come up with evidence that would convince a jury. So while from a legal standpoint, the victim does not play a role in whether the charges go forward. From a practical standpoint, the victim's cooperation is very helpful and significant in moving cases forward. If the prosecutor decides to move forward, she files an information or indictment. An information charges a misdemeanor and does not require a grand jury. The prosecutor just fills out some paperwork and files it. An indictment charges a felony and must be issued by a grand jury. A prosecutor cannot issue an indictment on her own. She's got to have a grand jury to get involved in that process. So a grand jury is a body of people that are convened for a period of time ranging from a couple of weeks to a couple of years. It depends on the jurisdiction. So some jurisdictions will have grand juries that come in for a couple of weeks to maybe a couple of months. Some of them seat grand juries to meet for 18 or 24 months. If it's any period of time more than a month, they usually only serve 1 or 2 days per week, and they'll just hear as many cases as the prosecutor brings to them during that time. The grand jury can subpoena evidence, they can subpoena witnesses, and so they can convene their own investigation. In New York, a grand jury is comprised of 23 members. A quorum is 16 members, so in order to vote on anything, they have to have 16 members. When the grand jury is convened, it hears evidence from the prosecutor only, and the proceedings are in secret. They are not open to the public. And so only the prosecutors, the grand juries, and the witnesses will hear what goes on in the grand jury proceedings. And so the grand jury only gets one side of the story. In New York, at least 12 of the grand jurors must agree in order to charge a citizen for a true bill. A true bill is the grand jury's certification that sufficient evidence exists for the citizen to be charged with a felony offense. If the jury finds insufficient evidence, that's called a no bill. So true bill or no bill. If the grand jury true bills a case, then the prosecutor may indict that citizen for the crime. Because the grand jury only hears the cases that are selected by the prosecutor, and because they only hear the state's evidence, it is often said that a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. The indictment that follows a grand jury true bill begins a case just like a complaint or a petition starts a civil case. So the indictment lays out all of the facts that are going to have to be proved at trial, just like a petition or a complaint lays them out for a civil case. So it's going to have to contain the jurisdictional facts, it's going to have to contain the elements of the offense, the name of the offense, just like you've got to have all of the elements of a civil claim in a petition or a complaint when you file it. And so the indictment can be subject to a motion to dismiss, just like a complaint or a petition can be subject to a motion to dismiss in a civil case. And so, like a civil case, the first procedural move by the defendant is often to file a motion to dismiss the indictment, alleging some sort of defect in the indictment. A judge's decision to dismiss an indictment is one of the few decisions that is appealable by the prosecution. There are a lot of decisions that the DA cannot appeal, and that has to do with implications related to double jeopardy, which you'll cover in criminal procedure. But this is one of the decisions that can be appealed by the prosecution without any double jeopardy implications because a jury has not yet been impaneled. If you want more information on either New York grand juries or federal grand juries, there's a link here to the relevant handbooks that covers the processes in both of these jurisdictions.